afternoon to those of you who have just joined us, maybe late morning for some of you. Thank you very much for joining our Lumu for MSPs Lite training today. I'm Nicole Ibarra, the Director of Product Marketing here at Lumu, and I'm joined today by Corey Doster, who is going to be going into the ins and outs and all of the kind of technicalities of how Lumu for MSPs Lite works, what it is. Before we get started with our training and dive into all the fun and exciting details about Lumu for MSPs Lite, I want to give you a little bit of context about what it is. And Corey's going to give you a lot more information about that as he goes through the training, and you're going to be able to see it really, and also why we launched it. So I just want to give you a little bit of background about this and what we're doing here for MSPs. So really what Lumu for MSPs, we've had this solution for a couple of years now. It's a platform that enables SecOps for MSPs, gives you that network visibility and the orchestration to be able to designate actions and block threats in real time for your clients. Right now, more recently, we launched Lumu for MSPs Lite, which is basically a free version of Lumu for MSPs. It's a free, no cost, a free forever solution that's available for MSPs to kind of get started and again, just kind of grow their SecOps practice, implement a solution at no cost, see kind of how it works. Really the difference here though with our Lite solution is that it's just in a limited capacity. So it has all the same capabilities that you get with Lumu for MSPs, but just in a limited capacity when it comes to, tenants and endpoints and things like that. But it's a really great solution, really cool way to get started with Lumu and to be even, using Lumu on a daily basis as part of your MSP practice. And Corey's going to go through that. But, the reason we launched this, we want to make cybersecurity available to MSPs of all sizes, all types of different MSPs and just meet the demands of the MSP market, right? Helping that SecOps growth, that orchestration and automation, being able to implement that, that's really why we're doing this, just helping MSPs get the most of their existing tools and resources, right? So before we dive into the demo itself, I thought it was helpful to kind of give you a comparison of what Lumu for MSPs Lite comes with as opposed to Lumu for MSPs. So again, from a functionality perspective, it's exactly the same, but the Lite version is just limited in terms of the number of tenants. That would be unlimited with our regular Lumu for MSPs, but for Lumu for MSPs Lite, you can add up to 3 tenants, up to 50 endpoints or assets, and then you have integrations that are 3 per tenant for each type. So we have different types of integrations, out-of-the-box types of integrations for data collection, incident response, and SecOps as well. So it's just limited in terms of those kind of things. But again, same kind of functionality, same thing as Lumu for MSPs, but again, just in a limited quantity. So just kind of to give you a little bit of context there. And really at this point, I'll hand it over to Corey. I know he wanted to kind of contextualize a little bit about what Lumu does very briefly before we get into the portal. So just kind of understand and give you some context as to what you're going to be seeing when it comes to incidents and things like that. So Corey, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate your time today. So today I am going to be walking you through the setup of a new MSP Lite account in the MSP portal. But before I do that, I wanted to take just a minute to remind everyone how Lumu works once it's set up properly. So Lumu is going to consume and analyze network metadata, right? So we're going to have to set up a collection of metadata like DNS, syslog, NetFlow, or email for your customers' networks. And once we're consuming and analyzing that data continually, we are going to confirm indicators of compromise within your customers' networks by looking at that metadata, and we're going to show them as incidents in the Lumu portal. Once we set up response integrations, we're going to orchestrate blocks to these OCs within an incident using your client's existing cybersecurity tools. These are going to be your client's firewalls, their EDR solutions, DNS security tools, that sort of thing. So after I go through the setup of the MSP Lite portal, I'm going to walk you through a sample incident in the end so that I can demonstrate what this all looks like and tie it all back in together. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so before I show you the Lumu portal, what I want to do first is remind everyone that the stuff I'm going to be showing you today, all the information I'm using, all the things that we're going to do as part of the demonstration, you can find all these documentation resources at docs.lumu.io. It's open to the public. It's a searchable site. So all the things I'm going to be talking about today and how you do them You will find these in documents and articles that are found on this site. So once your MSP Lite account has been created, you're obviously going to need to log in to the Lumu MSP multi-tenant portal. This can be found at managed.lumu.io. So today, prior to this demonstration, I created a demo customer environment. It has an MSP Lite account, so I'm going to pretend like nothing has been done, when in reality, some things have been done, just to make the demo go a little bit faster. So when you first log in, after your account's been created, you're not going to see any tenants. You're not going to be sending any metadata to the portal, and you won't have distributed any licensed endpoints. So remember, to deploy Lumu, you need to create customers. These are customer tenants. You need to assign endpoint licenses to those tenants. And then you need to begin the process of collecting network metadata and sending it to the Lumu portal for analysis, so that we can then set up response integrations to actually orchestrate blocking the IOCs that we find and we alert you about and let you know about within an incident within the Lumu portal. So there's a lot of self-service motion here, right? You have the ability, if you go under deployment under tenants, you can create tenants, you can delete tenants, you can change the number of endpoint assets that you assign to a tenant. You can do all of this without having to talk to somebody like yours truly at Lumu. We give you that ability to do that on your own with the MSP Lite motion. So what I'm going to do really quick, you see I've already created a sample customer called Vandalay Industries. I'll be using this customer when we walk through a Lumu incident at the end. And I'll also be using this customer to demonstrate how we build out a successful Lumu deployment as we go along. But the first thing we need to do, remember, we need to create all of our customers. So we're going to do this by clicking on Create a Tenant. So I'm going to create a second customer tenant. I'm going to call this tenant Hooli. I'm going to assign 15 endpoint licenses to Hooli. So what are endpoint licenses? That might be your first question. So an endpoint license is assigned to any device on which we can install a Lumu agent. And the purpose of the Lumu agent for an endpoint is that it collects DNS metadata from that endpoint and sends it to the Lumu portal for analysis. So we can install this agent on Windows devices, Mac devices, and Linux devices. Devices like IoT, IP phones, IP cameras, you can't put an agent on them so they do not consume endpoint licenses. So why is this important? Really for two reasons. If you become a paid subscriber to Lumu and you want to overcome the limits of MSP Lite that I'm going to show you as we go through the demonstration, we license Lumu by assigned endpoints. The other reason is the first thing you're going to do as a best practice when you're deploying Lumu is you are going to push out endpoint agents as the first motion to begin collecting network metadata for your customers' network environments. So I'm going to go ahead and create a third tenant. I'm going to call this tenant Acme. And I am going to give it 30 endpoint licenses. So let's take a look. I gave Acme 30 endpoint licenses. What does that mean? So that means ultimately I can push up to 30 Lumu endpoint agents to endpoints located within the Acme network. It's a simple correlation. So at this point, I've created 3 customer tenants and I've assigned 50 endpoint licenses. So you see here, I've reached the first 2 limits of MSP Lite. I can create a maximum of 3 customers, and I can distribute a maximum of 50 endpoints across those 3 customer tenants, however I see fit. But we clearly indicate when you reach these limits, and that gives you options for decisions if you're going to stay where you're at, or if you decide you want to go into a paid subscription model. So once we've created our customer tenants and we've assigned our endpoint licenses, we need to start the process of collecting metadata. After we've done that, we're going to look at activating response integrations. So for this, I'm actually going to go into the tenant Vandalay and kind of show you what that looks like. And you'll notice before I go in here, I'm not sending traffic to Acme or Hooli, the tenants I just created. That means I'm not collecting network metadata, and I haven't configured any Lumu response integrations, which means I don't have the ability yet to orchestrate blocks to IOCs. I did this with Vandalay in advance. So I'm going to move into Vandalay and kind of show you how you would go about deploying MSP Lite. Remember, I said the first thing that you should do is deploy Lumu endpoint agents. Why is this? Honestly, this is the quickest way to begin collecting network metadata in a customer's environment, because you can use the power of your RMM tool to easily push out the endpoint agent in a silent motion where it's a headless agent. They're not going to know it's there, but it's sitting there in the background, collecting all that DNS metadata and sending it to the Lumu portal. So to go ahead and distribute endpoint agents, you have to create an installation group. And once that group is created, it provides you with an activation code. You use the activation code and the power of your RMM tool to push this agent out silently to the endpoints. So once you've done that, we push the agent out to the endpoints. We're collecting DNS metadata. We also have this special kind of agent. We call it a server collector. If you have customers who have Active Directory in their environment, then you would install the server collector on 80 servers running DNS. You basically would actually download this, typically manually, because you're not going to have 50 domain controllers in your environment. You're typically going to have 1 or 2. You're going to download the agent. You create a collector, and each server collector gets its own unique installation code. You're going to download and install the agent on the DC. You're going to activate with the code you're provided. And now you're doing something a little bit on top of the endpoint agent. You're now also collecting DNS metadata from things like IoT devices that can't have the Lumu agent installed on them. So you're collecting additional metadata from areas you might otherwise have gaps because you can't push out the Lumu agent to those types of devices. So now we're collecting DNS metadata. There are other ways we can collect metadata in the Lumu environment, and sometimes we choose to use them. Sometimes we may choose not to use them. So let me talk through this. So let's say you're in a heavy manufacturing environment and you have a lot of IoT devices, and maybe there's no Active Directory servers. So you want to be able to collect network metadata from those types of devices. Well, in this case, the best way to do that would be to capture syslog metadata. In order to capture that syslog metadata, we're going to deploy a Lumu virtual appliance. And so the purpose of the virtual appliance, it actually exists within the customer's network. It's a VM that can run on VirtualBox, VMware, or Hyper-V. Once we deploy that virtual appliance and activate it, we're going to add collectors to it, and like syslog or netflow. And basically, the purpose of those collectors is to grab that metadata, like the syslog metadata, and forward it securely to the Lumu portal for analysis. So you can see in this case, I went ahead and created a virtual appliance for Vandalay. And beneath that virtual appliance, I created 2 collectors. One is a syslog firewall collector. We'll say that Vandalay has a Juniper firewall in their environment. We'll also say they have a web proxy in their environment. So I also created a proxy log collector. What I would do to begin to collect this metadata on the virtual appliance, I would have to go to both the firewall and the web proxy software, and I would have to point those tools to send this metadata, these logs, to the IP address of the virtual appliance. Then we'll start seeing traffic not be zero. We'll start actually seeing live traffic increment so that we're now collecting that metadata in the customer environment. The third way we can collect metadata is to use Lumu integrations, and specifically the data collection integrations. I'm going to cover all 3 types of Lumu integrations, but the data collection integrations are how we collect network metadata in addition to the virtual appliance or the Lumu agent. So let's take an example. We have this Outlook 365 data collection integration. What that does, once it's activated, it actually interacts with the customer's Office 365 email tenant to analyze email metadata that is sent to the Lumu portal by talking to the Office 365 tenant. We're looking at things like emails that hit the user's mailbox, what mail servers, what IP addresses did they come from? If there are things in emails that have malicious URLs in them, we're going to look at that kind of data. So we're going to collect additional types of metadata with your third-party tools in your security stack. And we're going to use that to just enhance Lumu's collection capability. Now, The second type of Lumu integration is a response integration. We need to deploy these once we're collecting network metadata. These are the integrations that do the orchestration, the block work. So as an example, if you contact an adversary, perhaps you're reaching out to a malicious IP address or malicious URL, and you determine that is happening, Lumu hits on it as a confirmed IOC, then you need to actually be able to block those URLs or IP addresses. We would do that with a response integration to, say, your customer's firewall. In this case with Vandalite, we activate the integration for their Juniper firewall, so that as we hit upon an IOC, we can orchestrate those types of blocks. The same thing if we contain malicious file hashes, we want to pass those hashes back to your EDR solutions that you're using. So let's pretend that Vandalite is using Sentinel-1 as their EDR. So if we discover an IOC that contains a malicious payload with file hashes, we want to pass those hashes back to your EDR solution to protect the customer's endpoint even more. The third type of integration we call SecOps. And essentially, this is one of a couple of things. If we trigger an incident in the Lumu portal, you're going to get an email notification if you're a user in the portal, but we're going to want you to actually be notified by email of the incident, but we're also going to maybe generate a ticket in ConnectWise in your PSA to let you know of that with all the details that are found in the Lumu portal. We also have integrations to SIEMs. So there are times when you may want to send data from your SIEM for the Lumu portal to analyze. We support that. Or you may want to ship incident information to the SIEM for the purpose of compliancy, perhaps. This is the third limitation of MSP Lite. So remember, with MSP Lite, Nikki showed you earlier, you can have one response integration, one SecOps integration, and one data collection integration per customer tenant. So in this case, Vandalite Industries assumed they use a Juniper firewall. We activated that integration to be able to pass response blocks back to it, but we cannot activate the Sentinel-1 response integration because that violates the limitations of MSP Lite. So as I walk you through an incident, I'll kind of highlight that and point out like what the limitations are, why it might matter, and it might be a reason for you to upgrade from MSP Lite to a paid subscription. So to take a look at incidents, we go over an operation. I'm going to look at incidents. I'm going to look at an incident in Vandalite Industries. This had not really occurred. This is something that I triggered and generated. But first thing I want to say that, Lumu groups adversarial activity together and it displays it as a single incident within the portal. So when that incident is triggered, if you're a portal user, you're going to get an email notification of the incident. And if it's integrated with your PSA, like I said before, in the SecOps integration, it'll generate a help desk ticket with all the details of the incident I'm going to show you in the portal. So I'm going to actually be talking to you about this simulated incident, mojobiden.com. But before I do that, I want to point out, if you're going through the motions and you're setting up Lumu by yourself, and you want to kind of verify that you've got your metadata collection set up properly, you can trigger an incident by browsing to activity.lumu.io, pinging it. This is kind of a honeypot URL we use just to let you test and make sure your metadata collection is set up properly, working, and allows you to trigger an incident to confirm you've completed the setup properly. So today I'm actually going to be talking about this incident, mojobiden.com. I simulated this, but I did originally see this in a live Lumu customer environment. And I'm going to treat going through this incident in the context in which it occurred in the live customer environment, but understand this is not something that really happened here. This is all demonstration. So mojobiden.com, the way it occurred was an incident that was triggered as a result of an email phishing campaign. So an email was sent to an Office 365 tenant. It bypassed the spam filters. It made it to the end user's inbox. And then essentially what began to happen is users that fell for the phishing attack, they began to open the email at different dates and times. And in the body of the email, there were URLs that pointed to mojobiden.com, which is an IOC. It's a malicious URL and it contains black matter ransomware. So as you would expect, nobody opens their email all at the same time. So you would see in sort of an incident detection, you would see different endpoints with the Lumu agent on them or syslog metadata. You'll see them reaching out and touching the adversary different dates and times throughout the context of when this email first landed into the customer environment. So if we take a look at the kind of data you see, if you've got the Lumu agent installed in an environment set up collecting metadata, you'll see the name of the endpoint that contacted the IOC, the IP address of the endpoint, the logged in user. And in this case, I generated the IOC with a ping. In the real environment, what they did is they opened that email and clicked on the malicious URL. It opened a web browser, so that process might be firefox.exe, and they reached out and touched an IOC. So let's go through some of the highlight section of the detection. All of this in an incident, all these sections, what we're doing is we're giving you context around the contact with the adversarial IOC. So in the highlights, we'll see a summary. We see, when did we open the incident? When did Lumu detect this IOC? When was the first contact with this IOC? When's the last contact with the IOC? How long has this incident been open? And something to kind of highlight here. When an incident is generated in the Lumu portal, it's open until you close it. So you want to go through a remediation process, which we'll talk about here as we go through this incident. But when you're done, you're confident everything is okay, you'll want to take action by closing the incident in the portal. You don't want to log into the Lumu portal and see 60 open incidents. When you've remediated them, you only want to see the ones that are active, that no action has been taken on, or ones that are being worked on. So we're also going to show you in the highlights, we're going to show you if you have any automated responses set up. And in this case, remember, Vandelay has a Juniper firewall. We set up the response integration to the Juniper firewall. And so as a result, what we did, and you see this in the operation timeline, from the time the first endpoint reached out and touched the IOC, within seconds, 66 milliseconds to be exact, we orchestrated a Juniper firewall block. We told the Juniper, you need to block future contacts from any endpoint in the environment. Do not allow them to go to mojobiden.com. Block it. We also show you sort of an attack distribution. How is this IOC kind of spreading inside your organization, date and time? The compromise rater here, it's not really fancy or pretty in this case since I generated the incident. But normally what you would expect to see in a phishing campaign attack, you'll see different reach out and touch me or attempts if those users fall for that phishing campaign and they click on that malicious URL. This is also useful in the compromise radar because when you're analyzing how your assets are communicating, you normally wouldn't expect a user in this case to be clicking on an email at 1 in the morning. You can use the compromise radar in that point to assume that's probably an endpoint that got infected with the IOC. And as part of my remediation process, I need to look at that endpoint a little more carefully and do some cleanup perhaps. Remember, once we block the contacts with a response block integration, they can reach out and try and touch something. But if they try to go to mojobiden.com, the firewall is going to block that connection. But you may still see connections occurring after the block has been implemented. Also a sign there's an endpoint you probably want to remediate as part of your SecOps motion. Now, you don't see it here, but in the real incident, we had tied the Office 365 tenant to Lumu portal using the Outlook 365 data collection integration. And we would see in the email intelligence, we would actually see references to the users that had fallen for the phishing campaign. And we would show they're opening the email and actually trying to reach out to mojobiden.com. And this is very useful because it might tell you, hey, I have some users here that are falling for a phishing campaign. Perhaps I need to go back and give them a little more cybersecurity education so this doesn't happen again. So what does Lumu know, or what did it think about mojobiden.com? So when this occurred, basically, Lumu detected the IOC as mojobiden.com because it contained black matter ransomware. Ransomware contains a payload. It can cause damage. In this case, we identified that the ransomware contained 49 malicious file hashes. So we not only tell you what we thought about it, we also give you context about what others think about MojoBiden.com, just as relevant context to help you work through your remediation and kind of understand, what the motion is for your SecOps here to close this incident. So let's kind of take a look at virus total. Let me make sure you guys can see my screen here. Can you guys? I don't think you can probably see the screen. But if I go to virus total,
we see
virus,
it.
you can? Okay.
Yeah.
Virus total actually gives you an analysis of what other security vendors think about IOCs. So the important thing just to kind of look at here and review, we have a lot of vendors that know that this is malicious, this is bad, we shouldn't be making contacts with this infrastructure. But an important thing to note here is that Juniper Networks thinks that MojoBiden is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second. So not only do we tell you what others think about an IOC that we confirm, we provide you with more context from external articles from other security companies. We tell you, like, what is black matter ransomware? How does it work? How do I clean it up? That sort of thing. So we're giving you, again, context to help you run your SecOps motion. And the last thing we do with every IOC contained within an incident, we map it to the MITRE attack features. And this helps us classify the attacks. It helps you understand the techniques and procedures an attack can use to gain access to the network and actually cause damage or harm within it. So let's go back to what happened if this was a real incident within Vandelay Industries. So Vandelay Industries, as a customer, remember, they're using MSP Lite. So we have the Juniper response integration set up to configure the block to the URL mojobiden.com. But we can't add the SentinelOne integration. So all the file hashes that Lumu detected that would normally be passed back to SentinelOne to kind of make the endpoint aware of the payload, to be able to stop that malicious process or keep it from running in the first place, it didn't occur because we can't add that second response integration. So the third thing I want to point out here is, what if Lumu wasn't present in this environment at all? Remember I said Juniper Networks thinks mojobiden.com is clean? That means any kind of web filtering that would exist on that Juniper firewall would allow connections to the end of time to mojobiden.com because it thinks it's perfectly fine. So without Lumu in the environment whatsoever, you're going to see people reaching out and being able to touch mojobiden.com. With Lumu present in the environment, we enhanced the detection of the Juniper firewall. We taught it something it didn't already know. And if we had the ability to add additional response integrations like SentinelOne, that's where we talk about orchestrating your stack. So by orchestrating, it's like from the time we have that first contact to an IOC, we pass blocks back to the firewall, to the EDR, to the web proxy, like immediately in real time. So, no human can react that fast. So as you often see in the portal, when you're looking at an incident, by the time the analyst, me, came in to look at the details of the incident, Lumu had already remediated. So that's really the power and the beauty of Lumu. Let's take a look at Vandelay. Let's say this incident occurred and you, the MSP owner, said, you know what? I need to be able to add that second response integration. Or, this is great. I understand how Lumu works. I really like it, but I'm going to start deploying it to my customers. And I need more than, the limitations of MSP Lite. We give you a very easy self-service motion for you to lift the limits of MSP Lite and become a paid Lumu for MSP customer. So to do that, you simply go under deployment in your tenants. You click on see your subscription. And we give you options to do this motion online. You do not need to talk to me or anyone else at Lumu to do this. You can do this all on your own. And there's a couple of different choices I want to sort of illustrate here where we're walking through this so you understand. The first simplest choice is you want to pay monthly. This is, there's no minimums, no maximums. It's just a pay as you grow, fixed price per month, license per endpoint deployed, option. However, if you are okay and willing to commit to an annual Lumu subscription, not only are you going to see an immediate 21% savings for the cost per month of those endpoints, but as you expand your customer tenants, as you deploy more Lumu endpoints, the cost per endpoint per month is going to continue to decrease. So let's say in this MSP Lite plan, I need to add a couple more customers and I'm going to have a total of 105 endpoints. So I'm between 100 endpoints and 250 endpoints. So that means I'm going to say, I need to subscribe to this plan because I'm over 100, but below 250. So I'm going to click on the subscribe button. I'm going to be taken to a web form. I'm going to put in my credit card payment information and click subscribe. And immediately all the MSP Lite restrictions are lifted. And you are now in a paid Lumu tier. You're out of the free MSP Lite subscription. And you can do this all on your own. So I really want to thank you guys for your time today. Thank you for letting me walk you through an incident. Trying to tie back how Lumu works. Remember, we got to collect that metadata. We got to do the analysis to confirm IOCs, and then we have to set up metadata collection. We have to set up response integrations for us to actually be doing work within your customer's environment. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nikki.